isms? That's what's coming up on the Art of Bombing, episode 145.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Now podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to a brand new episode of The Art of Bombing. I'm Dan Bublitz Jr. It is Tuesday, June 30th. I hope everybody's week is off to a fantastic start. Today on the show, my guest is a fantastic comedian, Jenni Lou Russi. We had a great conversation. We had a very in-depth conversation and a very long conversation. We talked about a lot of things, and I'm anxious for you guys to hear this conversation. And because it was a long conversation, I'm going to keep the intro short. So let's get into the business real quick, and then we'll get into this great episode. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, like, review the podcast, leave 5 stars, do all that jazz. You can find all the back issues or the back episodes on artofbombingpod.com. That is our website. We're now back on Patreon at patreon.com/artofbombing. You can go support the show financially if you want. There's some really good tiers. There's only 2 tiers because I'm keeping it simple, but there's some really great benefits to each of those tiers. So check that out if you feel like it. But again, the best way to help is to leave that 5-star review and tell a friend about the show. I'm very excited, too, because I was just looking at, I've been sporadically checking out charts and stuff, and now we've entered the charts for comedy podcast in Australia and Great Britain, and that's pretty cool. The Art of Bombing is going international on the charts. We're internationally charting, and that does not sound good when you say it like that, does it? But, yeah, so that's cool. So for those of you that are listening across the world and globally, thank you so much for tuning in every week and supporting the show. I really do appreciate it. So we're going to get into this conversation. One other quick thing. Next week, I will be on vacation. I'm going out to Montana for a wedding. Don't worry. We're going to practice the social distancing and be safe and all that. I realize there's still a pandemic going on. But I'm going to go see some family that I haven't got to see in a long time. And I will be gone for the week, so there will be no Art of Bombing episodes next week. We're going to take a little week off for vacation, a little summer vacation, and then we will be back the following week. So there will be no episodes from July 6th through the 10th, and then that following week we will be back. So this Friday, I will be releasing one more, per the 2 episodes per week. That's still going to happen. So Friday, I'll release another episode, and then we're going to take a week off for vacation. So, all right, let's get into this conversation with Jenni. All right, here we go. Enjoy. How has your Saturday been so far?
Busy. Yeah, I've got a project in the yard that is overwhelming. And I'm working in the kitchen too. We're going on vacation, and I'm trying to. I spent the extra money on a cabin with a full kitchen,
Ooh.
And so So I thought, I want to, So I'm modifying some recipes and stuff. So I'm trying to get that done today. Figured that out.
Yeah, where are you guys going on vacation?
We're going to the North Shore. Do you know in Minnesota, Grand Marais?
I don't. I'm not very familiar with Minnesota, other than like Duluth and Detroit Lakes, and just a few places that I've been. Other than that. So
it's north of Duluth. It's a couple hours north of Duluth.
Oh, okay.
So it's way up there. I mean, it's practically up by Thunder Bay. And
okay. Is it on? Oh, I'm sure. Is it on one of the Great Lakes then?
Oh, Superior.
Okay.
It's the Superior Shore.
Oh, fantastic. So it's the best one, huh?
Yeah. And then, usually I go up to Alaska and you have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like it's a lot of stress, and I thought, man, there's no way I want to quarantine for 2 weeks before I can go out and do stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I get that. We're actually going to Montana. We're leaving this next Friday, but so we're going out.
Where in Montana?
We're going to Kalispell, Montana.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Have you been there before?
I have not, actually. I've only really driven through Montana other than when I was a kid. I've been to Billings, Montana, because that's where my mom's side of the family kind of lived for a lot of years. So, and because of that, I'm going to my cousin's wedding. He lives over in the Kalispell area, and he's getting married in July. So we're going to go. We're taking a whole vacation. We're going to go out there for like a week, and we're driving out. So we're going to drive out there, and then we're going to spend a few days after the wedding out in Kalispell and doing some sightseeing and whatnot, because we've heard that it's a big tourist area, very beautiful area. So
gorgeous, and a lot of hiking, horseback riding. I've done some trails there that were really nice. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we're talking about doing some horseback riding actually while we're out there.
Yeah. Do some research to find some place so that you, you've got it secure. Mm-hmm. And, you're going to have fun. Let me know if you go horseback riding.
Yeah, I will.
You can go out in the wilderness.
Yeah, if we can, I think that's one of the things we want to do. I think it'd be really cool. So it'll be cool too, because I get to see a lot of family that I don't see very often, because I'm not as close with my mom's side of the family because they've always lived far away. So we, growing up, they weren't really in my life a lot. So
that's kind of sweet.
It'll be nice to see them. I'll get to see my aunts and stuff, and a lot of my cousins. So it'll be a good time.
That's what weddings are for.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should get married again. How many times have you been married?
By law, once. Well, it's funny I say it like that, because it's like, well, technically, it was only once. I mean, if you go technicality, the second relationship that that inspired my one-man show and everything, we did have a wedding, but what happened is we didn't turn in the wedding license, and when you don't turn in a wedding license, it just expires after so many days, so it's not valid by law. And I checked with an attorney to make sure if that would be the case or whatever,
Right.
So we just didn't turn in the license. So technically we were never married. While we did have a wedding in front of friends and family and all that jazz, but we didn't actually turn the paperwork in. So I don't know. It's like hard. I don't ever know how to answer that question.
Yeah.
Technically once, but I've had 2 weddings, but I've only been married once. That's probably the best way to say it.
And I thought I remembered that you had been married twice, because you're engaged, and I think that's brave. Greg and I have been together forever, and in some states we're common law married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I feel like too, if you don't have to get married to have a good relationship. It's sure there's benefits and stuff or whatever to getting married, but there's also disadvantages, I suppose. It all depends on, a lot of it is who you're with and what they want and what you want, and if it works, it works. Who cares what other people think? You know what I mean? That's how I feel about it.
I don't see the benefits other than the tax benefits. What are the benefits?
Well, you obviously got the tax benefits, but you also got things like, like possessions and stuff. Like when you guys can put your names on things together and not being married, but sometimes that's not, you could still have trouble with the government because you weren't married, and, if one passes or whatever, that kind of stuff. So just like little legalities, really. But that's not necessarily important either. I mean,
and I'd rather spend the money on a lawyer drawing up a will and having, like, we both have our names on the deed, and, you know, I'd rather do that. I'd rather do that than my name on a marriage license. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around that right now.
It's not for everybody. I mean, that's the best thing. I mean, like, even with us, we've been engaged for almost 2 years now. So even though we're engaged, we're not like rushing to we don't even have a wedding. We're not going to have a wedding. We're just, when we're ready, we're going to go elope. We're just going to go do it. You know, it's not going to be a big, event where everybody's at and, you know, this big grandiose type of thing. It's just going to be when we're ready and we're going to go do it.
I think I would want to do it if I was going to have a big party, or if our parents were still alive or something. I will say that I was concerned when Greg had his accident. He had a rollover and he broke his neck in 3 places. And I was very concerned. But as soon as I told the hospital, you know, I'm his domestic partner, and they didn't have a problem with me being in any part of the situation. And they also were very accommodating with my daughter. So we were treated like family. And so that put my mind at ease.
Which is good. I mean, I feel like now too, like in modern day society, that it's probably not as relevant as it used to be. You know what I mean? Like in the past, if you weren't family, they were a little stricter on stuff like that. But like as time has passed, and you know, as society, even though we're really regressing now, but in a lot of ways, society did progress, and you know, domestic partnerships are a common thing. You know, like so. I think, you know, the restrictions, people aren't enforcing them as strongly as they used to, which is nice. They probably
asked Greg. They probably went in the room, and he wasn't, you know, from the very get-go, he wasn't real with it. And they probably did, though, say, hey, there's this woman out here, mad as heck.
Yeah. 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 That's probably security measures as well. I was like, is she really with you, or is she here trying to kill you?
Yeah.
She trying to finish the job or what? No.
Those situations, yeah, that's about the way it was. I actually, one of my really good friends, because we couldn't find him, and his work called and said he didn't show up, and they got a call from a woman saying that he had rolled over, and that she had called the emergency crew, but she had to leave. And so they were like, we don't know what to tell you. We don't know where he is. We just know that he's had an accident and he didn't show up for work.
Oh, wow.
So a friend, I called her and I told her everything. And then at the end I said, so would you mind coming over and helping me? And she said, I'm in your driveway. And I opened the front door and there she was. And so then we had a plan there were different routes he could have taken to work, and she took one and I took another. And she actually got to the hospital. I called her and said, state troopers just called me. She got to the hospital because I had called the state troopers and said, I'm looking for this person. And it was in the middle of winter, and she ended up at the hospital first. And she stopped me at the door and she said, before you go in, you're mad. Now is not the time. You're mad. Leave that out here. He's okay. And that was so cool for her to have the forethought that I might not have like said something right away, but at some point I probably said, would have said, how fast were you going?
No, yep.
In a blizzard.
Really good foresight on her part.
Yeah. She's a smart woman.
Wow. And was that where you live now? Like, how long have you lived in North Dakota where you live now?
This is our 11th year.
Oh, so you've been out there for quite a while.
Yes. I'm used to moving every once in a while. And so this is the longest, other than Alaska, this is the longest I've lived someplace.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Moved here in the summer of 2009, right after the flood. And, came out here. We were living in Salt Lake City. And my daughter had graduated from high school, and I thought that would be a good time. If I was going to make a change in jobs, that was the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So before she went to college, that summer would be the time. Before she went to college and after graduation, because before then, a couple years before then, some schools had expressed interest in me that I wasn't searching, but I was kind of doing a practice search. And I actually turned down something beforehand that I wasn't going to take my daughter out of high school. And I also didn't want to live someplace else while she lived there for high school. I wanted, for her senior year, I wanted to be even with comedy, like I'm not where I would be with comedy even because I made some parental decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like I don't have kids, but I would feel like if I was a parent, I mean, that's the right decision. I feel like is, making the parental decisions and trying to be in, because there's a lot of comics that do struggle with, their careers in comedy because they have families and, well, you got to have priorities and not the wrong ones.
Right.
Because there's some ones that have the wrong ones.
And it is a gender thing to some extent, but I think that's changing. I know that's changing because we are, we've redefined the gender roles. No, we haven't. How do I put this? We haven't redefined them, but we understand that parenting is parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And
that makes sense.
It's weird because we just celebrated, Father's Day and before that Mother's Day. And I almost wish that we would just combine those and say Parent Day because of those gender distinctions in comedy or even in my career in academia, there is this idea that, this was ages ago, this wouldn't happen today, but where a woman would be afraid. And I had been asked, there was a school that once asked me, well, if we hire you, will you get pregnant?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's mind blowing.
And I said, yes, and this was probably 1990, late 80s, early 90s. And I said, you're not allowed to ask me that question. And this interview ends.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Also, it'd be like, why don't you talk to the universe around us? That's not, I can't, I'm not a fortune teller.
Yeah, well, and yeah. There was a lot of context to that made that very, 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 very sad that they had even asked me that question. But that's something that a guy wouldn't be asked back in the 80s.
No, absolutely not.
But even, as a comic, there's this idea that a woman is responsible for the kids, I had a booker. This would have been in the mid, maybe late 90s. So again.
Okay, before we get into that real quick, how long have you been doing comedy? That's more just because I'm curious, because I don't think we've actually had this conversation. I know you've been doing comedy for a while, so.
Right, early 90s.
Oh, okay. So you
Early
started
90s.
in the early 90s. Okay.
Early 90s, yeah. I started in Alaska at Alaska Pacific University. There was this class for comedy, and I had just done a television commercial where I had just received my paycheck when I got this course list from the university, and the check that I had just received was the exact amount for the tuition for the comedy class.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, this is meant to be.
This is definitely a sign.
Yes. So I took this class. I was the only one who finished it. Everybody else quit. And it was taught by Clara Fireball King, who had worked with Sam Kinison and all those guys. I mean, she was from Texas and had come up to Alaska with an oil company. And so she taught this class, and it was wild. I found what I loved. And at that time, I was actually working in theater and for theater, and had hoped to do some opera and then did. But I didn't think I would be a comic, and took this class, and I was like, no, this is the thing. And that was so cool. Yeah, when that hits, when you get that. So then, I moved to the lower 48 a few years later. We moved to the lower 48. I was married to a park ranger, and he got transferred to another park. And I was talking to a booker, and he was booking me. I had worked for him and if I told you his name, I don't want to, because he is not.
No, you didn't.
It doesn't matter in this story, because it could have been any booker. At that time, any booker would have said this. But I had worked for him a few times, and I would work 2 weeks on the road, or 3 weeks, But so he was booking me for quite a long run. But my mother lived in the area, and I had a nanny. So my daughter came in the room, and she asked me a question, and while I was on the phone with the booker, and the booker said, "Are you a mother?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I didn't know you were a mother. That changes everything. I don't feel comfortable booking you on the road if you are a mother."
Wow.
And I said, "What?" Yeah. And this is in the mid to late 90s, when, we thought we had come a long way, baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Why don't you feel comfortable? What are your concerns?" And he said, "Well, what if your child gets sick?" And I said, "Her father lives here. My mother lives here. And I have a full-time nanny." And he said, "But would you leave?" And I said, "Are these questions you ask men? Because I know I have worked with you with male comics who are single parents. Do you ask them this question?" And he said, "That's a very good point." And then went right back to booking me. Went right back to discussing booking.
That's good. That's the way it should have been. Well, I mean, he shouldn't have even asked the question, but it's good that he actually took let the conversation finish, and then realized, oh, wow, I'm at wrong here. Let's just,
This booker is like most bookers. We like to say that bookers are, they exploit us. Yes, all of those things. They don't have a map. Yeah. They have no idea how far it takes to go from one nighter to the next one nighter, all these things. But they also, I have found in every one of them that human, aspect that can make me, frankly, justify working in that secondary field.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not enjoying it, then why do it? Whether it's a one nighter or whether it's, this is my career.
Well, absolutely, especially if, because with comedy, we all know it doesn't pay that great unless you get, you have to get to a certain level to actually make a decent level at comedy, or become end up in a sitcom or something that excels your career or whatever. So it's like, if you're not enjoying yourself, it's not about the money. So why do it? You're exactly right. You gotta.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, you got to enjoy what you do at some level when it comes to comedy.
And here's what bothers me. It's not the comedy. It's the means to an end, because you start out in stand up. You do the open mics, then you do the one-nighters, then you do, and then when you get noticed, then you do television or film, and then you come back to comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens to that craft? Like a musician, I'm also a musician, and I love playing the piano. I mean, it's something I love. And when, somebody recently asked me, what do you do, as a stress reliever? Playing the piano. That's it. And for a lot of us, that's comedy, like it's not just our job. It's not just our career, but it's that connection with the audience and the crafting of the material. We've talked about the crafting of the material with your show Renewed,
Mm-hmm.
So what happens to that when you're doing a film or focusing on your television career? And I'm thinking, wow, that's so sad, because that doesn't happen in other careers where you have to set aside the very reasons you are in that career in order to become successful in that career.
Yep, that's a very good point. Because you really do, and a lot of those other things are like necessary evils, if you will, that are, like you said, to get to where you can do stand up at the level that you may or may not want to. That's a really good point.
And it's not like they're incompatible. They are compatible, but because of the time, I mean, you really, you have to be disciplined to craft, to write material. You have to be disciplined.
Oh, absolutely.
And you also have to be disciplined if you are in a television show.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a little bit of television, a little bit of film. And while you're in a film, that becomes your life. It just does. It's like any other job. And so then are you a hobbyist as a comic in the meantime? And that just, I don't know. So that's one weird aspect. I mean, just one weird aspect of this. This is just so weird.
Yeah.
And
it is. Go ahead.
You were about to say, well, you were talking about the money. I don't get this. I do not get this, because, okay, I did take time off. I did comedy for, 5 years on the road, 5 solid years where, and I can tell you later how I booked myself. But for 5 solid years, I made decent money on the road. Mm-hmm. And then, my daughter was getting older. She was probably 9 or so. And I was looking into the future, and I was like, and then I was a single parent at that time. And I thought, oh man, this is not going to go well with me being on the road when she's a teenager. I know that I don't want that. So I went to grad school to become a college professor. And, so I really put comedy on the side. And then I worked really hard on my career in academia, and for various reasons, could not do comedy for a lot of reasons, and all specific to my goals in academia. Mm-hmm. And so when I came back to it, and I just said, man, I'm hitting this hard, I'm a senior citizen, and I am going to hit this hard because this is my encore. And the pay is the same.
Yep.
We are talking maybe I don't know. I can't do the math. I'm not a math professor. I'm thinking 15 years. Yeah. Like 15 to 20 years later.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's insane.
The money is exactly the same. Exactly. And no one's trying to, and I don't want to say no one, somebody's cheating, but, the people who, with whom I've negotiated pay, I can tell they are at their limit for the budget. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, they're getting rich, and then it's
well, there is definitely some shady stuff with like producers and bookers and stuff. Not all of them, but there are quite a few that, they do what's called double dipping, where they'll get a deposit right away. And then when the comics got to pick up more money that has to be delivered to the booker and stuff like that, which, so there's definitely some shady stuff there. But even so, it still hasn't went up, pretty much since like the 80s, it feels like.
Yeah, it hasn't gone up at all. In some cases, it's less. Mm-hmm. And even corporate gigs, pay for corporate gigs, it's the same. But to further add insult, there's no hotel room.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of gigs, yeah.
Yeah, venues are not supplying the hotel room. No. And then that means, I either have to, and sometimes I camp. Sometimes I camp. Sometimes
that's what I want to do, actually. I want to buy a little camper is what I've actually been looking around, and it's something that is definitely in my forethoughts of doing, is just buying a little camper and using that when I go on the road.
I'm going to send you a photo of me. I used to live in a camper.
That's awesome.
I'll send you a photo of me outside the camper.
I love it.
My stories. I've lived in a camper. I lived in a tent. I lived in a tent while I was doing the weather on the television news.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't a KOA. It wasn't a chain. It wasn't a chain campground, but it was, it was nice. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't like I was homeless. That came later, but it had a nice bathroom, and I was getting ready in the bathroom, and I was putting on my makeup and stuff. And there were some other women coming in and out of the bathroom. And I thought, and this was in the 80s. And I thought, I wonder if they know that I'm on the news tonight. And then I thought, are they going to know? They're camping. Because they're just so weird. Funny. Everybody else in the campground, they were just, looking like I do now, they weren't, but here I was, curling my hair, putting on makeup,
getting all done to the nines.
They're probably thinking, that's not going to keep the bears away.
That's funny.
Yeah. But I mean, I do keep, just in case there's ever an emergency, I keep a tent in my car and sleeping bag. And, there have been times I've camped, but I just don't understand why venues do not respect the talent. And here's the deal. We are not respecting ourselves.
I want to add to that.
Yeah.
Because this reminds me of something I just saw the other day on Facebook. And this is part of the problem. And I pointed it out on this. So there was somebody, and I don't know who he is. I've never heard of him. I assume he's a comic or a producer, but he was posting in all these comedy related Facebook groups asking comics for videos, little clips for a new show that was going to be on a new network or something like that. And of course, a couple people asked if there was pay. No pay. Nobody's making money on this right away. We can't pay you. If money's to be made, maybe down the road we'll pay you. And he posted this like in all these groups or whatever. And then as people were asking questions, he kind of modified the post or whatever. But I went on there and I was like, I just pardon my French, but I just fucking blasted it with questions. I blasted it with the first question I asked: what's the network? What's the website? Who's who's financing this project? Who's producing it? Who's editing it? All these standard questions. And then at the end, and then I said, because it was essentially saying, well, we're going to pay you an exposure. And then, like, the last question I asked is, does exposure pay rent now? And then I said and then my last question is, why hasn't anybody else asked these questions? And then I said, this is the reason comics aren't making money. And this is the reason you guys are, we're broke. And I said, basically I said, what did I say? I said, this is the reason comics pay hasn't went up in the last whatever, because nobody wants to ask questions. As soon as somebody makes a promise that they can make you famous, you jump right on board. And then I go, so if you believe he's going to make you famous, boy, do I have a deal for you.
Right. Now, and that's that same conversation took place in Fargo on a thread about a commercial that they were shooting, and they were looking for actors, no pay.
I've seen that a lot, especially locally.
And here's the deal, I mean, that's what I teach, So if I have students who are paying tuition to learn that craft, why should they not be paid?
Oh, absolutely. And this is especially with that kind of thing too, because, with that, there's a budget. Somebody is paying an advertising firm or a production company to make that commercial. So if you're budgeting that, why aren't you budgeting talent?
That's exactly what I asked in that thread.
It's funny because I had the same conversation with some producers in the Sioux Falls and Sioux City area. Was the same thing where they, like, in one of those acting places, looking for actors, no pay, local commercial, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I'm like, well, somebody's paying for this. How are you getting paid? I mean, your company's making money. You're a production company. You telling me you're doing this for free too? Because that's the thing too with art. For me, it's one of them things, like, if somebody has a passion project, like a short film or a pilot, and there's very little money involved, and everybody's just kind of contributing because they believe in the project, and they're trying to, maybe if we do this and somebody sees it, it can lead to something else. I get that. I totally respect that, and I understand why artists do that. That's artists coming together. But when production companies, especially with commercials, come in, or even these, people looking to do, like, stand-up comedy shows, they come in with this production, and they're like, well, we're doing this production on this blah, 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 but there's no money for the talent. I'm sorry. We'll help you get exposure, and it's like, will you though? Because that was the other question I asked. How many people are going to watch this network that you got? Can you guarantee any numbers? No, you can't. It's like, it's so frustrating.
And with a commercial, they're selling a product. And so they will be making money off of that commercial.
Oh, absolutely.
And if they're not, then they shouldn't be investing in a commercial. Don't buy the airtime. Don't buy it. Yes. And there really is a craft to doing television commercials. I've done television commercials, I've done voiceovers, and I've also done, basically film acting. And film acting is so different from a television commercial. It just, it might be so subtle to someone else that they don't notice it. But trust me, a trained actor notices the difference.
Oh, absolutely.
And notices the difference in focus. It really is a difference in focus. And the prep is different. And,
here's a question for you. I have a question for you on this. Get your perspective on this. Do you think, because a lot of this, what we're talking about as far as on the commercial end, is something that I've noticed more? It happens everywhere, but I've really seen an emphasis on that in the Midwest. Do you feel like maybe it's because in the Midwest, people think, these guys don't know anything about acting, or they don't, not just acting, but the industry. So they're not going to know that they should be getting paid. So we don't need to do a budget. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like they're taking advantage of people being naive. And they're
basically, they don't respect themselves or don't understand the business. And I don't think it's specific to the Midwest, because I lived in southeastern New Mexico, and I'd have to say that when I negotiated, I used to go through an agent when I lived in New Mexico and when I lived in Cleveland. I had representation. But in New Mexico, occasionally I would negotiate my own deals. Mm-hmm. And I think that my agent and I had the same struggles, communicating the importance of respecting the talent as professionals. And that included, I mean, I remember I did an industrial for PetroServe, those big truck stops. And I played a waitress in one of their industrials, their training videos for their staff. And they didn't want to hire a makeup person, but they wanted to be very specific about my makeup. Well, that's fine. You can either pay me or you can hire a makeup person. But if you're going to be that specific, then you need to pay for it, because you're asking. And
because it's one thing to be like, hey, we can't afford a makeup artist. Can you do your own makeup? But then when they're looking for something specific, that's where it really gets down to where it's like, okay, now you need, I mean, I can do my makeup, just regular makeup, but I'm not a makeup artist. So, you know, if you want to pay me to do something specific, you definitely need to.
Well, and that's something that, like, because at the time, like, I'm actually 45 years ago, I was a hairdresser.
I wish people could have saw your face. For the listener, she made the greatest face when she said that.
Well, I take it very seriously, but so I have done makeup for photographers and all that, you know. So it's funny, because when you tell them you have other talents or other skills, then they assume that just comes with the package. No.
Yep.
And that was a contract that my then agent negotiated. So, I don't think it's different. I don't think it's different whether an agent is negotiating it, or I think that's why we should have agents, because then it makes it easier, because then they are used to those discussions. You know, we are just like, you know, we're just so taken aback, you know, what? Mm-hmm. But they're used to that. So I think it's good to have representation for actors. But I think that it's just the naivete, and also, let's be honest, a lot of these production companies are fly by night, because it's tough for them too. And so they're just throwing it out there. They probably don't understand, because there is a difference when you work for a production company that has done it for years and years and years. There's no question about how you're going to be treated as a professional.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and the sad thing too, the sad reality, especially in comedy, is that for every one comic that'll demand respect and the pay, there's 100 other that'll be like, I'll do it for free.
Absolutely.
And that's what really is ruining it's ruining the pay in comedy. That's why it ain't, it's a main contributing factor to it, is there's so many, and it's so frustrating, because it's like, exposure will never pay your rent. It ain't gonna, and a lot of times, what is exposure? Do you even know what that means? Do you know how to use exposure? Because exposure, I mean, it's just like having a social media following. You can have a huge social media following, but if you can't get that to translate into ticket sales or merch sales or things of that nature, it doesn't do any good. You're not using your exposure, and it's not paying your bills.
They're getting exposure. You know, I feel like, by having me in your club, that's exposure for you.
No, absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
So yeah, it goes both ways. And, they are charging money for tickets, so, and here's the deal. They are in a tough position, especially now. They're in a real tough position. And so, how do we treat them fairly and yet demand respect as professionals? Because I believe, and I know, I've been a little tough in negotiations with some of the local bookers. I mean, how do I put this? And by local, I mean 5 states out, because I'm in Valley City, North Dakota. Utah's local. So I know I've been tough, but I feel like I am negotiating and setting a precedence. Mm-hmm. And what comes after me, the next comedian will suffer or benefit from whatever I have negotiated. And the truth is, I'm an empty nester. I have another career, and this gig is not going to put bread on my table. But for the next comedian, that gig puts bread on their table and puts shoes on their kids' feet.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good way to look at it. That's a really great perspective. I honestly never even thought about that. What I do, how it affects, comics in the future. And that is a good way to think about it, because it really is up to the people performing and to set a standard, because otherwise, we just keep getting taken advantage of.
Right. And I'm in my 60s. They can get mad at me, and when you're in your 60s, a lot of people are angry, I'm pissing people off left and right.
Oh, well. Yeah.
They love me.
Well, and it's...
how much longer are you going to be angry at me? I'll be gone. But so it's easier for me to take that risk. It's not the same risk for me as it is for somebody in their 30s who's a single parent.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, that's true. But I mean, if you're a single parent in your 30s and you can't negotiate yourself to get paid to do comedy, you should probably not be doing comedy. I mean, you know what I mean? Like if you're willing to do it for hardly any money, because that's another thing too that I've seen over the years is that comics don't understand business, and that's one of the biggest negative impacts. Is that because you're like somebody says, "Oh, I'll give you $50 to host." And then right away you're like, whoa, $50 I didn't have, and I only have to do 5 minutes of material. Fantastic. Where's it at? Oh, well, you have to drive 200 miles one way. Oh, wait, now I have to pay for gas, and there's no hotel, so I'll have to drive back right away, and blah, 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 blah. And suddenly that $50 just paid for your trip there.
And here's the deal. You've seen me do that.
Like, no, but like you said... But my point is you like it, not referring to you because you're not using comedy right now as your main source of income. You've already said you're an empty nester. You've got a career. You're doing that. Right. You're not doing comedy to put bread on your table, and that's the difference. The comics I'm talking about are wanting to make it a career and use it to put bread on their table. But you're never going to get there if you lose money.
I'll do it once. And you see me do some, you see me at some shows where, it's an investment.
Yeah. Well, and
I'll do it once.
That's fair. Like I've did shows. I do believe that sometimes you do have to invest in yourself and do certain shows, but that's where it boils down to. And I've had this conversation with other comics and stuff and people that asked me to do gigs and I turned it down. And then I explained to them, I said, it's nothing personal, but when I look at a gig, I got to look at what I'm getting out of it. If I'm not making a certain amount of money and I have to drive a certain amount of miles, what is my gain out of this? Is there going to be is there going to be a TV producer there that might be able to see me and put me on TV? Is there going to be other bookers where I might get other work? Does it lead to money down the road? Things like that. These are all things that people don't think about. They just think about that instant. Oh, I got a gig. I got some money. And
right.
And you're right. You have to invest sometimes, but you got to be careful about the investments, and you can't keep investing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you're smart. You're saying, I'll do it once. Yeah, that's about the only time you should do it is one. You know what I mean? Like,
well, basically it's like an audition. You get to see who I am, especially because I live in the middle of nowhere, so a lot of people haven't, seen me. B, I don't put a lot on Facebook. I don't put myself out there, and I want to be real clear that at this point, I have other income, so I'm not dependent on it. But as far as comedy is concerned, I'm very serious about it. And as I look at retirement.
Yeah. I just want to say that when I said that before about you have the other job, I was not saying that you don't take comedy serious. I just want to clarify that if you thought that.
No, I didn't think that.
We've had plenty of conversations where I know you're serious about comedy, so I just want to clarify that that's not what I was saying.
Right. Well, and one reason, it's not because of you so much as, oh boy, I'm just going to toss this out there. Recently, because, I'm looking at retiring, not anytime soon. I'm not making, by any means, any announcements. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
By any means, I'm not making any announcements, but I am looking at campers. Let's put it that way. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, this is what I want to do full time in my retirement. And there are people who have told me, well, Jenni Lou, at your age, you're too old for this. And I'm like, what? Okay, for what reason are you telling me this? Because I don't think anyone's too old or too young. Because I look out in the audiences and I'm in a large demographic for comedy. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of people in my demographic out there in the audiences. And I think that there's, we've been talking in the comedy community a lot about sexism. I think there's some ageism going on too.
Oh, I would. There's all kinds of isms going on in comedy. It's not.
Well, it's based.
Comedy right now is kind of a toxic place. Is a kind of a toxic thing right now, in all aspects.
The whole craft is based on isms. If you look at your material, I'll know I'm being sizist here, Yeah.
I have to say though, people saying that you're too old to do comedy or whatever, that is such the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Just because, when I lived in San Diego, one of the funniest comics I ever saw who didn't do a lot. She did comedy quite a bit in the area. She probably didn't work the road because of her age, but she did a lot of gigs in the area. One of the funniest comics I ever saw. She was like in her late 80s. Oh yeah, you're right. It should, people get too old to do comedy because she's killing a sold out room at a comedy club while new comics like me are like not doing very well. You know what I mean? Like just destroying these rooms. So to people that think that's not true.
Well, what I would ask them is, because they are getting older every day. Mm-hmm. What does that say about their future?
Oh, absolutely.
I actually think that and these people, it's just been recently that I've heard this, and it could be because now I'm, making strides. And so they see that and so they see my intent, and it could be sincere desire on their part to help me. But whatever the reason is, I would ask them, then where do you see yourself when you are my age? If this is a craft you love, are you going to quit because you're older? I think it speaks more about themselves than and how they look at themselves.
Yeah,
that
almost
must
like
be scary. I'm not afraid of getting older. That must be terrifying for them then if they look at me and say, well, she's not going to go anywhere, because I think that there are a lot of different directions I could go in. And so I'm just.
That statement right there, where you're going and you're right. There's a lot of different directions. That's something that's always frustrated me. People, like somebody saying to you, you're too old to do comedy, like that, meaning you should just strap it up and call it good. That's like, to me, that's really dumb because what are you getting out of comedy for you personally? That's what matters. You know what? If you're happy, because you said where you're going to go with comedy. Well, what if somebody doesn't, what does that even mean? Where are you going to go? Do you mean like get famous and get a sitcom, or do you mean be in the movies? Like, and it boils down to what somebody wants personally, as a comedian. Like for you, and I'm not saying this is true, but for what you might want is, like you said, buy a camper, just go around and do stand-up shows regionally. You know what I mean? Just like featuring and headlining and just performing and making a little bit of cash doing that. You're happy with that. That's all that matters. You know what I mean? Like, I hate when people try to like define going somewhere in stand-up, because there's so many different roads. Nobody has the same path, and everybody defines their own success in comedy. What one comic thinks is their success might not be another's comic's idea of success. But as long as you're happy, that's all that matters.
Well, and defining success. What is success? I mean, I knew somebody who was very, very wealthy, and yet they were miserable. And somebody would have pointed at that person and said, that person is very successful. That person had a huge house, had, trips, money for anything, and success in their career, had accomplished some things in their career. And yet that person, it was a relative of mine with whom I was very close. And that person was miserable. And so that shaped my view of success. Mm-hmm. That really shaped my view of success. And just like, I think about this, I think every time I listen to an episode of this show, aren't we always bombing? Mm. And by the same token, aren't we always successful? And that's that balance that nobody else can define for anyone else. No one else can define that balance for me. And every day as comics, we are walking that fine line between success and bombing. And in every bomb, we can find success. Mm-hmm. And in every success, we can find a bomb.
Oh, absolutely.
So if we're looking at those two independently, we're not going to be happy. Mm-hmm. And, if I end up with a semi, now, that's dreaming big. If I end up with a semi with a back door that pops down and have stage lights in my semi and I'm doing comedy shows in the Walmart parking lot, if that's my success, I'm also bombing. But if that's my bomb, I'm also successful, because trust me, there are people watching. That's exposure.
Yeah, right?
That's exposure.
Yep, exactly. No, that's a really good point. And it's also a good lead-in. We've been talking for almost an hour, and we haven't got to what this podcast is actually about. So we are going to lead into this, because it's been a fantastic conversation, and I want to keep it going. So let's get into the bombing part of this. I want to have you share an experience of a time where you felt like you bombed really hard.
Oh boy. This was huge. Okay. Well, I don't know. It's funny because I hear all these other bombs, and I'm thinking, well, that's pretty bad. I think this was pretty bad. I told you that I started comedy in Alaska. And so there weren't a lot of opportunities to do comedy. We did have Pier Street Annex, which for about a year after I started, they had an open mic and then they closed, about a year later. So that was one of the places that we were able to do comedy. But, and I say there were probably 5 of us who were regulars. And so I started an open mic at a lunch hour at a cafe. It was a cafe, movie theater, bookstore, cinema, theater, also plays.
It's a lot of things.
Yes, but that's, that's Alaska. And so I would do an open mic at lunchtime on Mondays. And a local reporter came to the open mic, and then he decided that he wanted to do comedy. And we became very close friends. Just in that process. That happens all the time when you're doing comedy. You spend hours writing and all that. So when I got this gig at the senior center, the Anchorage Senior Center, he asked if he could come along because he hadn't been to a show up there yet. And I said, sure, come. I thought it was going to, it's now I don't bring friends to watch me work. But he came. And at that time, that's when they had those, they had female condoms. And for some stupid reason, that we all have material that we would never do today. I would give away a female condom, in my act. And so they hated me. The entire set that I had, they hated me. But when I gave away at the senior center, when I gave away the female condom, they couldn't get their walkers in action to leave fast enough. They were just enraged. And they were just, so my friend, throughout the show, he would laugh, but he was the only one laughing. And he decided to get under a table because he didn't want them to see him laughing, which was only more weird because the whole time I'm doing this show, the only laughter is coming out from under a table and he's trying to hide and stifle his laughter. So when they got very upset, then he starts to stand up. The table moves. It's just chaos. And then the worst part was, the next morning, a woman called me and told me that I was never allowed to do another show at the Anchorage Senior Center again. That I should not give away condoms in a senior center. Didn't I realize who I was talking to? So now that I'm a senior citizen, every time I go to Anchorage, I want to go into the senior center and just set up a show and give out condoms. Because now that I'm a senior citizen, I understand seniors should be using condoms. They're not using condoms and they need to.
Oh, that's so funny. You want that redemption.
Yes. I really, 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 really want to do a show at the Anchorage Seniors. Yeah, it really is for that redemption. But they just hated me. And I think about, because, wow, I every time I listen to one of these episodes, I think about the reasons for bombing. And with that one instance, that was the worst for me. Or the one that at least comes to mind. Maybe other people can say, oh no, Jenni Lou, you were totally unaware, but this one was worse. But in my mind, that was the bomb. Yeah.
Now,
mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just going to say, because we touched on ageism a little bit, we've been talking about that. And I wonder, do you think that had something to do with it? with bombing because of demographics and, you know, not necessarily ageism as in being discriminative, but like the demographic. You were a lot younger then, you didn't understand them.
Right.
Versus like now that you are a senior citizen, you do understand senior citizens. You could probably go back, do a show and destroy, you know what I mean? Like, cause as a comic, I feel like I have a strong demographic in my age group. You know, get me in front of people that are like maybe 18 to early 20s, or people that are over 50 to, even 55 and older. I have a hard time. I feel like I have a hard time and I can struggle with getting them on my side, kind of demographics or whatever. Do you feel like maybe that was part of the issue with that? I
do, and yet I don't think that I should have allowed it to be an issue. As I listened to the bombs, and then, this is the reason why that bombed, and this is the reason. This one was multifaceted. For one, basically what you're saying, that maybe that wasn't my demographic. Rick Roberts had in his episode with you, he had mentioned the contracts and that sometimes just saying no was the better thing to do.
Yep.
And
Ask
so I could say, I could say, so if I had given them that questionnaire to which he referred, I would have seen that the last person that they had was probably a birding expert. It wasn't a stand-up comedian. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that I should say no because this isn't my demographic? I was pretty young at the time, and that wasn't my demographic. I don't believe so, but I needed to be aware of what they liked. That they like birding. So maybe I should have stuck to the park ranger material and not talked about the condoms, though park rangers do use condoms.
So really it boils down to a lack of experience rather than the demographic. I mean, that's really what it is.
Yes. And with that experience, I think it always comes down to one. It could be all these things, but if we wanted to simplify it, be in the moment. Mm-hmm. I wasn't in the moment. Oh, you don't like this. Okay. And just talking to them. I also wasn't in the moment with my friend being under the table. That was hysterical. I should have called that, mm-hmm. I should have.
Oh, yeah, that would have been really funny. You could be like, I'm doing so horrible, my friend's hiding under a table.
Yes. My friend is hiding under a table because he's ashamed. I mean, people are ashamed to laugh at my stuff, I mean, that is the height of it, and just being in the moment. So even if I'm bombing, yes, I think that there are a lot of reasons. Know your demographic. But I think it was 4:00 in the afternoon or something like that. That's not a good time for comedy. Just all kinds of things were set up for failure, but that doesn't mean I couldn't have succeeded. But I do think that in that I succeeded and I failed. It was a bomb and a success.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, because you learned something from it, and now and that's really where what you're saying goes hand in hand, because you can even learn from being successful, or having successes too. Like you said, they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, and you can always find success and failure within those things.
Right.
The bumming of bombing. How long does that typically last for you?
The bombing of bombing.
The bumming of bombing. The dreadful feeling after you bomb. Does that even affect you? Are you at a point where you're like, it just happened?
Yes and no. It affects me like that. That bomb still affects me. I mean, if would I be a little nervous going into the Anchorage Senior Center? There's a reason I haven't walked back in that building since. So I don't think that the essence ever leaves me. On the other hand, I have a rule. Whether it's an audition or a show, I leave it. I do something right after every show or audition or interview or something that is bigger than that. That becomes my goal. I used to audition about 10. And when I lived in Cleveland, I had a lot more auditions than I do in Valley City, North Dakota.
I wonder why.
But I worked my tail off to get as many auditions, and I wanted to do as many car commercials as I could, and as many voiceovers. Baby needs new shoes. I had to make money. So I would go to about 7 to 10 auditions in a week. And, I didn't get 7 to 10 jobs every week, So most of it was, you would say failure, but not at all. It was my job. I just looked at auditioning as my job. And after every audition, then I would have maybe lunch with a friend or go to a movie or go to the park with my daughter. But that became the highlight of the day. And my day was planned that this is what today's about. Oh, I have this audition. And that's not to say that I didn't invest in the audition or prepare for the auditions. I would. And from doing that, then I learned that that's the best way to set aside, will I get the booking? And just constantly rethink about what I could have done in the audition. Whether I said the right thing to the casting director, questioning myself. And when I came back to comedy, I do the same thing.
Well, that's really good because it's a really good. Not only is it kind of a distraction, but it's balance, and that's really important. It really it creates a balance.
Otherwise, I will question I would question every decision. I would question everything. I had the last show I did, everybody's talking about what was the last show you did before the closures? And the last show I did before the closures was at the Fargo Comedy Festival. And I was in one of the feature showcases and had a blast. Fun comics, fun audience, yada, yada, yada. Yet there was something that I said to an audience member that I still remember, and I think, that was a misstep. It went fine. I had a good set, but I remember that misstep. And I'll bet he doesn't. So it wasn't like I offended him, I don't think, but it's not something I would plan to say.
Yeah. Yep.
Life.
Yep.
At least it's not my dogs.
Getting heckled on the podcast by a fire truck because my window's open. Well, at least, and what's going to be funnier is if I edit it out, because then people are going to be like, well, I didn't hear no fire truck. But we paused long enough because you and I both knew what was happening. So we're like, we'll wait. Oh, that's so great. How do you find your material as far as what do you find, what's funny to you? Like, what do you...
I'll be honest with you. I'm struggling right now. I think one of the reasons I'm struggling right now is because there are a lot of things I cannot discuss.
Is that because of your career?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So many changes. Many changes with, and and so I feel myself and I think editing is the is the worst thing for writing comedy material. And when I have my students write, whether they do have to do a comedy show. I teach public speaking as that's one of the classes that I teach, and their final exam is a comedy show. And I tell them not to edit themselves, and to dare to say horrible things. And that's not to say that they will say them on stage, but as they write. Mm-hmm. And right now, there are some things that I find myself editing myself when I'm just writing. But it is from my life. I talk about the different jobs that I've had, and I've had, a lot of different jobs, and they all were related. Like I mentioned, 45 years ago, I was a hairdresser, and that was because I wanted to do hair and makeup for theater. And then I became an actor and worked the dinner theater circuit. And then I went into television news journalism. And that was just by accident. And so I had all these different jobs, but they're all related. And I talk about those in my act. But there are so many things happening right now that I do find humor in some things because of the irony, but there's no way.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose with that, and I know that happens with people who have dual career, and I say dual careers because you have a career in comedy and then a very public career being, in an aspect like that where you're a teacher or whatever. And then I've seen that with attorneys and stuff, and where they'll change their stage name just because of that.
Right. Right.
They'll use a stage name because of their other job being like, you can't do this or this or whatever. But it's yeah. But at least you said, you're coming up soon and hopefully retiring, and then it won't matter, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, and that retirement, I mean, it's a long plan, I mean, I have to find the right camper and that's not easy. I've been shopping, Yeah. Now, in my syllabi for all of my classes, I have a statement that says that nothing that my students do will ever be used in my act. And that they do not pay money to be a part of my act, but they do have to pay money to see my act. And that contract is extremely important to me because I don't ever want a student to think that they did something in my class or with an assignment that would be discussed in a comedy show. Mm-hmm. I want them to have that trust.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And you'll hear me talk about, something in class. Never happened.
Mm-hmm. You just make it up, which is fine. I mean, comedy.
Yeah. Well, or maybe it was the pizza delivery guy.
Okay, fair enough. Not necessarily made up, just different character. All right. You got me from that. But speaking of that, before I got a few more things to wrap up some of the fun stuff. But before we get to that, I do want to ask, because you do teach, public speaking and public relations and things like that. And you've been very gracious. You've helped the Sno-Jam Comedy Festival, with stuff as far as like doing press releases and things like that. Do you have any tips for like comics when it comes to not necessarily public speaking, but like public relations and almost like marketing?
What I really think, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. You asked about, where I find material, and actually my focus during this, I'm going to call it a break, has been more on organization than on writing. I have done a little bit of writing, but not a lot. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about how should comics organize themselves, marketing, and preparing for going back on the road. And I think that so you have 2 or 3 comics. And I think that it needs to be, when you put together a show, I think you need to divide the labor, and maybe one of them writes press releases. And every time you do a show, a press release is sent to every news outlet, radio station, newspaper, whatever, even those neighborhood papers. Those are the ones that get read. And send out a press release with a photo. Photos get attention. People don't just read, oh, there's going to be a comedy show at XYZ bar. They see that photo, and that gets the attention. So a photo of the headliner and a press release.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for writing a good press release? As far as like what should people include? Like, I know, but listeners probably don't. Right.
3 paragraphs, an intro, just saying, hey, this is why it's newsworthy. An intro, maybe it's newsworthy because of who the headliner is. Maybe it's newsworthy because of the special dinner that the bar is serving. Maybe it's newsworthy because they've never had a comedy show before. Then the middle paragraph gives the details, a little bit about each one of the comedians, a little bit about the venue, and just the meat of it. And then the final paragraph, how do you get tickets? How much are they charging? The who, what, where, when. Who do you contact to get tickets? How much is it going to cost? What time does it open? What time does the show start? Because they are 2 different things.
Yep, that's true.
And there is a format for press releases that you can find online. You just, formatting for a press release, you can just find that online. But those 3 paragraphs, if you keep it to 3 paragraphs, an editor won't have to edit much. They can just, basically, you're in charge. They'll just print it in most
copy
cases.
And paste it and print it. Yeah.
Right. Which is what you want, because you want to be in control of the message that's sent out. And it's also, 3 paragraphs gives enough information that, it doesn't seem like an ad, but it's an informative, because it is. It's an informative piece. And this is something, oddly enough, I'm not good at this part in my own career, because public relations is different than advertising in that it's creating and maintaining a relationship with your target market. And I hear you ask people, about the videos that they post about their fans. And I'm like, I am not good at creating a relationship with that market. I have friends, and I also have relationships with bookers or venues, but fans, I think that this might be where the Minnesota or North Dakota or Midwestern humility comes in. I'm like, oh man, why would I? No, I don't want fans. And I'm the same way with posting my videos. Oh, but if they see that, they won't want to come. Then they don't have to come see my show.
Yeah, but at the same token, seeing a little sample might be what gets them to come to the show. Where it's like, oh, that was a funny little 1-minute joke. I want to see what the rest of her act is. That's another way of looking at it.
That's the only way to do it. How else are you going to build a relationship with that market? Because I've been thinking about my market as being the venues and the bookers, and you keep coming back to the fans, and it really is, I've done a few festivals. I've done the obviously the Fargo, the Sno-Jam. I did the Cleveland Comedy Festival, and I did Alaska Before You Die. But as with all, just about everybody, I've been turned down for a lot more than I've been accepted. And I've been told by people with experience that they are looking at the clips that I send with my submission and how many views I have. And I'm like, I don't want people, I don't want to tell people they should watch my video. I just,
Well, that's weird to me because a lot of times, like, at least for me, the videos that I send for like submissions and stuff, if they're looking at how many people have viewed it, then I'm never going to get into a festival, only because I don't send public videos to bookers and festivals. I send unlisted videos usually, because usually what I'm submitting for an audition or whatever isn't what I'm posted. Like, I'm not going to post a whole, I have a 25-minute clip out now, but I'm not going to post my whole show online. And sometimes, they want a longer video or even a 10-minute video, but most of my other clips I'm just doing like little jokes and stuff. They're not even long enough for a submission. So, so if that's the case, I'm screwed.
But I think, I'm sure that there's at least one festival, because a person told me, you need more likes. And I'm like, I could see that with
social media followings. I have heard that where, they'll look at your social media following and things like that.
Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it's that. And I don't have, I don't know. I think it's that Midwestern, really, you want to follow me? Why?
Yeah. Well, and I guess for me, and it's really helped for me because I study marketing, and because of that, that's what's really changed my perspective on the marketing and social media and things like that. That's why you're always seeing me ask questions to people when they post videos and this and that, because I'm curious. I'm doing research and finding out, because I look at, bookers and venues and the people like that, not as my market. They are my network. They're those are the resources that get me to my market, which are the people that are going to buy tickets to come see me. And without the people that buy tickets to come see us, we have no show. And if people aren't going to be willing, because at the end of the day, comedy boils down, being able to consistently get booked at comedy kind of boils down to drawability. If you can't draw an audience, in some big clubs, that you don't have to draw an audience because they just paper the room. And the people that come could give two, they don't give a crap who's performing. It's just what they're doing. You know what I mean? But for the most part, it boils down to drawability. And that's going to come from, people in your target to come see you.
Right. See, I wanted to, speaking of that target, I want to add something to the idea of sending out those press releases. When you send them, the goal isn't just that it gets printed, or if it's at a radio station that it gets on their event calendar, or a television station that it gets on their event calendar. The ultimate goal is that if it's at a radio station, that they get the press release and with enough advance notice that then they invite one or two of the comics to come in or phone in for an interview. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then same with television, if they have a morning show, get them in for that. And with the newspaper, it's not just that that you want them to put it in the paper, because of course that helps. But that's not the only goal. You want that newspaper editor who gets that to send a reporter to the show. Mm-hmm. Because if that reporter sends somebody to the show, you're going to get a news story, and that's going to help the venue. You're going to look great for the venue. The venue is going to say, this was awesome. We've never had reporters here before. They're going to think that you are a star. And then for you, that creates more content for your press kit.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that's a good point too about not just the chance that, or the potential opportunity that they'll send a reporter, but that they'll do a write-up. It's kind of like getting invited to be a guest on the radio show. Same thing with the paper, because I've had instances where I've sent a press release to a paper, and instead of printing the press release, they did a whole interview, and then they did a whole write-up about me as a performer and the show. And so, then suddenly you're going from a press release that's going to just be wherever in the paper to a front page spread, potentially. That's not always the case, but kind of adds to what you're saying with the other goals.
And that just needs to be a part of our routine. I really think that during these closures, it's an opportunity for us to regroup. I had been so focused, when you first asked me the question about, where do I get my material? Before the closures, I was in a routine, with even with teaching online and all that, I was in a routine where, at the end of the day, I went back to comedy and I would text myself 3 premises to write the next, to use as prompts the next day. And then the next day in the morning, I would write on those 3 premises.
Do you write did you write consistently? Do you spend, do you dedicate a certain amount of time every day to writing?
Every morning. It's just what I did. I've gotten out of that routine.
Yeah.
But every morning, I would just, sit down and some mornings I'd spend more time on it than others, depending on whether the muse struck. But that's what I did before. Then now what I've been doing is regrouping and, looking at how to organize myself, because I'll be honest with you, some of the, issues that I've been thinking about with sexism and ageism, I've been thinking I need to take charge of what I'm doing, because it's really going to be up to me to direct myself from my goals. And so I invested in some sound and light equipment, and I did some research, and then Nathan Holtz gave me a lot of really good information, and I ordered through him.
Don't listen to her. Nathan Holtz is the worst. I love you, Nathan.
I mean, seriously, it was so helpful because I had done some research, and then he said, all right, so let's imagine you're on the road. Are you really going to use that?
Oh yeah,
are you going to?
Nathan is a fantastic resource for gear, and not just for live performing. He's a tech head and a gear head and loves this stuff, and he can give you. Honestly, the microphone that I'm using right now, he recommended it. I told him that I was looking at this stuff, and he's like, "Well, I've been looking at this microphone. It's really good." Blah 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 blah, and so then I ended up buying this microphone. So,
well, I had done some research and I had some ideas about what I wanted in terms of the way it looked, and at one point I was like, but I'm a theater director. I know how this is supposed to look. And then he said, based on my experience in theater, and then he has, oh yeah. I'm talking to the right person about this then. And not only did he have the experience in that realm, but then the actual being on the road, fitting this in your car, making it as efficient as possible. And so that was kind of time consuming, packaging that. And my next goal is unpackaging that and practicing with it so that I can set it up by myself. I don't want to have to depend on, I don't want to have to bring other comics with me to depend on that. I want to bring other comics with me for their craft, not for their labor,
Yeah.
And that's...
Oh, I was just going to say, and I've said it on this podcast before, at the very bare minimum, I think every comic needs to have a portable PA system.
Yep.
Maybe because lights can be expensive, and I understand if you can't afford lights, but at the very bare minimum, have a portable PA system. I cannot, there's so many times that since I bought my PA and when I travel with it, that it has saved my arse.
Here's why I invested in lights. Boy, we're covering so many different.
Well, this is a good investment. I just know that I've looked at lights and they can be expensive. That's all I'm getting at. But I think if you can have the whole setup, even better.
And you can get a couple of lights. Really, all you need are a couple of lights, because you walk into those rooms, we talked about how pay has stayed the same, so that's bad. But also another difference that I notice in that 15-20 year hiatus, the one-nighters that I'm doing, and before the shutdown, I was on the road every weekend, if not Friday and Saturday, Friday or Saturday. I was doing shows every single weekend. And so I've seen a lot of rooms, and for these one-nighters, these aren't clubs, these are one-nighters. They no longer respect the comics for the show. They give you the space, but they don't create the show. You have to convince them to turn off the televisions. Mm-hmm. You have to convince them to turn down the lights in the audience, and they don't have lights on the stage. And so that's why I got lights, because if they are going to leave the television on, because, so there's that coffee clatch that every Friday they come back for the Friday night beer, and they're not going to watch the show, but they are going to watch the TV, and the venue needs them because they buy beers every Friday night. That lighting is going to focus the attention on the comics.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely.
It's changed. It used to be that, you arrive at the venue and they got it, that it was for the show. Now it's just, they don't create the space for the show. They create the space for the comics,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Before getting back to the public relations stuff and the press releases, I just wanted to ask one other thing, because I forgot to ask. What about, how do you know where to send them? What's the best way to find the email of the person you should be contacting?
Right. Within I'd say 50-mile radius, because conceivably people would come within a 50-mile radius of that venue.
But are most so say I wanted to send a press release to a local paper for a show I was doing in a certain town,
right?
Would I go to their website and they're going to typically have an email, or how does that's how do you know where to send the press release?
So I look at a map and then make a list of the cities that are within a 50-mile radius. Don't overlook those little towns, because those little towns are going to have a county gazette or the county herald. So then do a Google search for newspapers, radio stations, television stations in those areas, in that 50-mile radius. Then on their sites, that's where it gets kind of goofy, because I would suggest, in hindsight, I helped with Sno-Jam, and some of those press releases did not get printed, and I don't know why. And it's okay if they don't get printed, if there's at least the acknowledgement of the event. Put it in your event calendar. Do a story. And so I learned from that experience, and it could be in that market, because I don't find that in the markets that I've worked here. But it could be, because that was South Dakota, it could be in the Sioux Falls market. I really think you have to call the editor and say, to whom, just ask them, to whom should I send a press release about an event coming up? Mm-hmm. And they might say our arts editor. So then just look on the website and say, do you mean so-and-so? Oh, no, so-and-so isn't here anymore. Oh, okay. So-and-so. Yeah. Oh, that's your education editor. Oh, yeah, we changed that. It's the education editor and arts editor now. So it's changing so much that I think that it would be wise to do a phone call. It's time consuming. That's why I say, packaging this. Now, I sent to you guys, I thought if I didn't, I'll send it to you. That's not going to help you. Because now you're in Minnesota.
And this isn't, and it wasn't for me personally. I mean, I've been doing this long enough and working with some of the stuff where I've Googled and I've went on websites. I've did research on where to send them. This is more for people listening on how they can, because I've been on websites and it's like, well, I don't know where I would send a press release, but then there's other websites on like news sources where they're, you go through the contacts and there's an email specific for press releases, And there are two ways you can call them and confirm with looking at the website, because they always have a list of contacts. Yep.
With their editorial staff. Or Google or do a Google search for articles and see who wrote the most recent article about a show.
Oh, that's a good idea too.
Include that person in because almost always in the byline, they have their email address. Mm-hmm. And so just send it to them too, because those people are looking for stories. Mm-hmm. They want to pitch stories to their editors because they want to keep writing. But, I thought I had sent a media guide, but that wouldn't help you now. But my point is, create a media guide so that you aren't doubling your efforts, because you're going to be back to someplace, another venue, maybe not that same city or that same venue, but you're going to be back to that area where in some ways, some of those places are going to fall within that 50-mile radius. Mm-hmm. So create a media guide for yourself so that you just have this running, this live document that has all of your contacts. And it's so time consuming. It just is. And that's why I say that's, what this time is for. It's investing in searching out equipment, coming up with a plan, coming up with a calendar. You should have a calendar so that when you put the date of a show, when you book a date of a show, 3 weeks before that show, there should be a note on that calendar to send press releases with headshots. Mm-hmm. 3 weeks before that show. So that gives the editors enough lead time that if they're going to do a feature, like in your case, they did a feature, bravo. If they do a feature, that's great. Or if they just print it, that gives them plenty of time to make that decision, or both.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really great information. Thank you so much for that. I feel like a lot of people are going to benefit from that, because that's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. I've been wanting to have you be a guest on here for quite a while. I'm glad we finally got to do it. All right, we do have to finish up. This has been one of the longest recordings in a while, and it's great. There's so much information, and I love it. But we're going to get to some fun stuff. Do you have a pre-show tradition or thing that you do before you perform?
No, just post. I don't think I have a pre-show tradition.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's right, though. You do have a post-show tradition, because we talked about that earlier. And then what's been your favorite gig or the best gig to you so far?
I would have to say right now, I have two. Last fall, I did the Vanguard Arts Center in Sioux City, and that was so much fun. Have you done that venue?
I have not done that venue yet. No, I've heard of it, and Gary is great. I want to get Gary on the podcast, and it just hasn't happened yet. So
everything about that was so much fun. The people, I just wanted to take them home with me. And they didn't disrupt the show, and we didn't talk during the show or anything like that. They were there for performers, because that art center is set up for the craft, whether it's comedy, whether it's music. That art center is just set up for the craft. And then Gary just does a really nice job, managing it, for the comics.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So that's fantastic.
That was a lot of fun. And then the Fargo Comedy Festival, I got to meet some people that I've seen on Facebook, and I'm like, oh, I want to know that person. And that was just so cool. That was just really cool. And the show was really good. And all of the shows were just awesome. So, and then the Comedy Festival did something kind of cool for the locals on Monday night, of the month preceding the festival. Monday night, they had a special open mic, just for the local comics. And that was kind of fun. So it just made the Fargo Comedy Festival then seem like the culmination of this month of comedy. So,
that's fantastic.
Yeah. So then that show that I got to be a part of, it wasn't just that the lineup was a lot of fun. The other comics were so much fun. It was, and funny. It was so much fun to watch, but, it was the culmination of a month of comedy.
Oh, excellent. And last thing, pick a number. That's what you do. You pick a number between 1 and 20, and then I'm going to ask you a random question because we're finishing
17.
off. 17. Most embarrassing moment.
Most embarrassing moment. Ooh, I'm sure it involved my students. Oh my stars. I took them on a field trip. Okay. I took them on a field trip to a restaurant before a play that we were going to see. And the food was taking forever. And I had called the restaurant in advance and said, hey, we're coming, yada, yada. They had the tables set up, everything, but the food was taking forever. And so then I stood up and I said to my students, I'm sorry, but we have to go. So I will have the restaurant pack the food up to eat on the bus, but we have to leave to get to the show on time. And so we get on the bus, and I had the food all packed up, and I start passing it out. And the restaurant had been really nice about putting in napkins and plastic flatware and all this. And my students pulled out flatware from the restaurant that they had stolen. I said, what is it? And they said, we didn't know they would give us.
Oh, that's so funny.
Then, move forward a couple of years, that restaurant booked me as a comic, not knowing that I was that professor.
Did you show up and they're like, well, tell you what.
Oh, everybody in that place knew who I was. Every server, I swear there were cooks coming out of the kitchen giving me this stink eye.
Oh, wow.
And the owner came over to the table that I was sitting at after my set. She comes over to the table after my set and she says, I didn't know you were funny.
Oh, wow. That's a great story. Oh, wow.
That's so embarrassing.
All right. Well, where can people find you, Jenny, if they want to find you online?
Well, as you know, I hide from my target market.
That's why they got to find you.
So catch me if you can. I'm on Facebook. The Facebook with the photo of the dog is my Facebook with my students. The Facebook of the photo of my mom or photo of me or photo of my daughter is always my Facebook with people with comedy. And then my website is jennilou.com, just JENNILOU.com. And yes, I'd love to reach out to my target market, but I'm so afraid.
Well, they can reach out to you now. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan. This has been a great conversation.
The Art of Bombing is a Blitz Entertainment production. Hosted and produced by Dan Bublitz Jr., The Art of Bombing intro music was written and performed by John Holt. All other music used in this podcast was under the Creative Commons license. If you would like to help The Art of Bombing, you can do so by subscribing, rating, and reviewing our show on whatever podcast application you use to listen to The Art of Bombing. For previous episodes, blogs, and more, visit artofbombingpod.com. Have a great week, and remember, stay safe so you can live to love.